Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because we're about to dive headfirst into a really fascinating framework about existence, consciousness, and, well, the very fabric of the universe itself. Today, we're exploring a cosmic blueprint based on the spiritual and philosophical writings of an author named Zhu Feng. We're going to unpack some pretty massive concepts here, everything from the difference between temporary existence and eternity to the literal mechanics of how a soul actually takes shape, all the way up to a highly specific cosmic hierarchy. By the end of this explainer, you're going to have a crystal clear understanding of this framework's completely unique perspective on why we are all here. So let's jump right in. Here's a quick roadmap for today. First, we'll tackle life versus eternal life. Then the mechanics of consciousness, scale all the way up to the cosmic hierarchy, and finally wrap up with a guide's personal journey. All right, Section 1, life versus eternal life. Now, this is the foundational rule book for everything that follows in the spiritual philosophy, so we really need to get this distinction right from the jump. In the source text, there's this deliberate use of capitalization. A lowercase life represents something completely temporary. It's just a single, fleeting journey in the mortal world, and it can end at any moment. But uppercase life, that is totally different. Uppercase life is described as your eternal, non-material essence. It never, ever stops. The text uses this brilliant metaphor. Imagine you're just changing clothes to match the weather outside. The different outfits you put on are like those temporary lowercase lives you live, maybe as an animal, maybe as a human, maybe even as a celestial being. But your actual body underneath all those clothes, that is your uppercase, eternal life. It simply tries on different physical garments as it travels through the universe. The source material illustrates that concept with this absolutely beautiful passage. It says, "The wild grasses grow in the fields lushly. They flourish in the spring and wither in the autumn each year. The wildfire can never burn them out because they will thrive when spring breeze blowing." So just as the grass endlessly cycles through the seasons, flourishing and withering, the framework states that our core, uppercase life, exists eternally through countless past and future mortal lives. A single blade of grass might die in winter, sure, but the essence of the grass survives to bloom again. That's exactly how this philosophy views our existence. But that naturally begs the question, how exactly does this non-material essence actually take on a physical form in the universe? That brings us to Section 2, the mechanics of consciousness. To really understand how we get our physical bodies, we first have to define what a soul actually is. According to Zhu Feng's writings, souls are simply consciousnesses wandering in the boundless ocean of psyche. Basically, think of your eternal life as a specific state of consciousness. And honestly, this is the master key to this entire framework. The state of your consciousness completely dictates the physical form you take and the environment you're born into. Let's break down how this actually works in practice. The text basically maps it out like this. If your state of consciousness is vibrating at the level of a pig, your eternal life literally shifts into the physical form of a pig, existing in the livestock world. If your consciousness elevates to that of a person, boom, you appear as flesh and blood in our material world. But it goes way higher than us. If your consciousness is that of a celestial, you might appear in what the text calls the 1,000-year or 10,000-year world. And if your consciousness actually reaches the level of a god, you exist entirely in the non-material world. Your inner state of mind literally generates your outer physical reality. Which brings us to a really fun question posed in the text. For those of you familiar with classic literature, you probably know the famous Monkey King, Sun Wukong, from the epic Journey to the West. He had 72 different changes in avatar. But how? How could he physically transform into a tree or a bird or a whole temple? Well, the answer, according to this philosophy, isn't just magic. It's highly mechanical. Sun Wukong mastered the mystery of changing his consciousness at will. Because he could instantly shift his internal state of mind from a monkey to a bird to a tree, his physical form of life had absolutely no choice but to instantly change along with it. He bypassed the entire system just by mastering his own mind. Now that we understand how individual consciousness creates physical reality, let's zoom out to see how all these different forms of life interact on a massive, universal scale. Let's look at Section 3, the cosmic hierarchy. The source text outlines a very strict, highly structured ladder of existence. Picture a 6-step ladder. Down at the very bottom, Step 1, we have bacteria, the lowest level of life. Moving up to Step 2, we get plants and insects, then animals at Step 3. And we humans, we're hanging out right here on Step 4. Above us, at Step 5, are gods, Buddha, and celestials. And finally, at Step 6, the absolute highest level of life is called the greatest creator. And the golden rule of this entire hierarchy is that higher levels hold absolute power of life and death over the lower levels. Now, that power dynamic leads us to the core purpose defined by the text. All lives serve higher levels, and the ultimate value of existence is serving the greatest creator. The text does not mince words about this. It states that just as people raise chickens and pigs to serve humans, humans exist to serve the greatest creator. If an entity stops serving its purpose to the level above it, it loses its value for existence. And the text warns that if humans lose their value, they won't necessarily cease to exist, because remember, life is eternal, but they will get downgraded. They might get bumped down to a lower level, like the animal world, just to continue serving in a different form. To sum up this massive, sweeping structure, the author writes, the meaning of life is to be an actor in the grand script of universal life. The entire universe is a great dramatic performance. Basically, every single life, from a tiny bacteria all the way up to a celestial, has a strictly required role in the script. The universe is just a giant stage, and we are all just playing our assigned parts. Let's bring this all down to earth in Section 4, A Guide's Personal Journey. So we have this gigantic cosmic blueprint. But how does this actually feel to a normal human being just trying to figure out their life? Well, the source text shifts into this really fascinating dialogue between a seeker named Moth Orchid and the author acting as a guide. And Moth Orchid asks something I think we can all relate to. She basically says, hey, I'm trying to lead a meaningful life, but does everyone actually have a specific mission to improve their souls? And if they do, how do I find out what mine is? The guide's answer is really interesting because it separates our human ambitions from our cosmic ones. First, he explains that we write our own earthly scripts, things like getting married, raising a family, maybe running a company. That's just the human layer. But your actual uppercase life soul mission? The guide says you literally cannot perceive this on your own. It's only known by higher levels of life. So to truly uncover your soul's mission, you have to actively listen to the guidance of gods, Buddhas, and celestials. You have to let those higher levels show you the way, because it's just too hard to figure out from our limited vantage point on step 4 of the ladder. Then Moth Orchid asks a super personal question, and this gives us the dramatic narrative hook for this whole explainer. She asks the guide, would your life trajectory and values be different without your curious car accident? This is a total watershed moment. The guide explains that before this accident, his consciousness was just entirely normal. He was confused, chasing money, and only looking out for his immediate nuclear family. Standard human stuff. But the car crash, it was a massive catalyst. After the accident, he says his consciousness literally restored a hidden memory of a higher realm called the 1,000-year world. He completely transformed into a guide to life. He dedicated himself to ushering in what he calls the Lifechanyuan era, serving all of mankind rather than just himself. The accident literally jolted his state of consciousness from a human level to something much higher. And because his consciousness shifted so radically, his ultimate endgame changed too. The guide states his explicit goal is to reach what the text calls the Elysium Celestial Islands continent, specifically to live on Barikia Island as a rewarded super-celestial being. I mean, talk about specific. And this perfectly ties his personal story back into the hierarchy we looked at earlier. He's not just trying to be a good guy, he's actively trying to level up his consciousness to reach a highly specific non-material realm defined by this exact framework. Naturally, Moth Orchid hears all this and wants in. She notes that she can enter the non-material world in her dreams sometimes, but she asks, is there any way for me to let my consciousness enter the non-material world freely when I am awake, without having to get into a car crash? And the guide's final answer is so simple, yet so incredibly profound. He tells her, yes, by the method of being free from the mortal body in meditation. By meditating, you can quiet down the physical vessel, those temporary clothes of your lowercase life, and actually allow your eternal uppercase life to travel freely. Which leaves us with a really fascinating thought to chew on today. If our outer reality is entirely built by our inner state of consciousness, what new worlds might you discover if you just sit quietly and look within? Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this explainer today. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.